Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two members from York City, York County with us today. Delegate Mike Mullin, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Senator Monty Mason, good to see you again, sir.
How are you?
Good, good. Delegate Mullin, tell us how your tenure is going so far.
Well, they haven't kicked me out yet. It's been a great honor and a great ride so far. This year, since we've had such an amazing election cycle, we've had a real opportunity to have 15 new members of the House on the Democratic side, and really changed, I think, a lot of the tenor and tone that we've had in the House of Delegates this year.
And of course, you predicted that wave election, did you not?
I'm not sure that anyone I know could have actually predicted something this large.
Number of changes in the House beyond the membership in terms of transparency. Talk to us about those.
Well, you know, for the first time, we're actually having recorded votes in subcommittees, which means that you're finally going to be able to find out how your elected officials vote in the most substantive issues that they're doing. Most of the work of the House is actually done in subcommittee, and so making sure that that's actually being recorded is important. But now we're also having cameras in all of our committee hearings so that you can watch live what it is that your delegates are saying, doing, and voting on. I think this is a real important opportunity for us to have truer and more fair transparency throughout the House.
Senator, lots of issues around elections. There were two anomalies which resulted in the 51-49 split in the House of Delegates. Sure. There was a name literally pulled out of a bowl to determine the results of one election, and there was another election that caused a lot of controversy as a result of people being given the wrong ballots because they were not correctly identified in terms of the precincts they lived in. Talk to us about the need to address those kinds of issues.
Oh, yes, sir. And one of the ones, the one decided, but the draw is, of course, down in our area, down on the Virginia Peninsula. And I think what you saw there, excuse me, just a large number of people that came out to vote. So we really got a lot of people out to vote this year, and it changed the dynamic of the election. I think there was some question as to different code sections there as to whether there was a recount, a draw, and then a recount, or whether they anticipated the draw first, then the recount. So probably some things that need to be cleaned up as far as over 100 years of election law. In the other race, although I'm not certain how the people were put in the wrong district and given the wrong ballot, the one thing I'll say there is that I think a largely overlooked part of our service community are the registrars in Virginia. You know, we all owe our being here to the work that the registrars do, but they're really underappreciated, underpaid, and don't get the kind of attention and focus that they deserve. We're trying to work on that with some things, hopefully in both chambers, but certainly on the Senate side. But I think, you know, that indication right there, people in the same neighborhood given different ballots, shows the importance of that work.
And of course, absentee voting is still high on your agenda, as I understand it.
Yes, sir. In this administration, we've always worked at that. I succeeded John Miller, who was a great thought leader there. We believe that it's important to have more people voting and to have it easier to vote, and to make sure that it's done properly, of course. This administration has taken the lead already in saying that they want to expand the right of people's no-fault absentee balloting, if you will. What we've done is set up a Christmas tree of some 17 reasons that you can vote early. Right. I think we'd like to do away with that and set up a period. I don't know if 21 days is the right number. That's a lot. But Jill Vogel has also been a leader on the Senate side in privileges and elections, and we have just sent all of our absentee bills to a subcommittee so that we can then send a letter to the governor and say, hey, we want to work with you, but there's some funding mechanisms here. There's some practical application issues that we have to work through. But I think we're all looking for a way forward, and I'm enthusiastic about seeing something happen in that front.
Delegate Mullin, I know you're working on some school discipline issues. Talk to us about that.
Well, you know, Virginia refers more of its students from the classroom to the courtroom than any other state in the nation.
Any other state?
Yes, 50th out of 50. Worse than Alabama, worse than Arkansas, worse than Mississippi. We have a lot of work that we need to do to make sure that we're not sending students from the classroom to the courtroom. And so I have a bill this year to be able to start to stop some of those discretionary referrals. You know, things like disorderly conduct, you know, things that would have gotten sending you or I to the principal's office now get you sent to my courtroom as a prosecutor. And so we're trying to be able to stem some of that flow and be able to re-empower teachers and principals to discipline students within the classroom, within the school system, instead of having to do it in my courtroom.
What caused the problem? Some people suggest that because of inadequate funding and a lack of resources, especially at the K through third grade level, there aren't many alternatives to discipline like suspension.
That's true. You know, I think that there are a multitude of reasons why we found this situation, and it's only been in the last 10 to 15 years that we've seen such an explosive uptick in the number of referrals to law enforcement. I think part of it is that teachers feel that their hands are tied when it comes to being able to make discipline decisions in the classroom, and so we need to re-empower those teachers to be able to do the same kind of things that our principals and our teachers did when we were in school.
And understand that the majority of students who are subject to this type of discipline are minority students, students who may be physically or mentally challenged.
Yes, by far the largest communities that are affected by this are communities of color, students who might have an individualized education plan, an IEP, which is usually a sign that someone has a learning disability, an emotional disability, or needs additional services. And so those are the students who are disproportionately affected by being referred to the court system.
What are the three top priorities you have this session in the Senate, would you say?
Well, I've been working, it kind of segues to what we just talked about with Mike, and you know, there are a lot of challenges with the citizen legislature, but that's not one of them. I mean, that's a great example of having someone who every day works hard to put people that need to be put in jail, but who recognize that there are places that things are happening that they should not be. You mentioned a lot of these children have mental challenges or IEPs. I've worked very closely with our community services boards and the challenges they have as our community safety net. The opioid epidemic and crisis is hitting this state, this country extremely hard. They're on the front lines of that. The mental health challenges in our jails, they're on the front lines of that. So we really have model CSBs on the Virginia Peninsula, but big challenges, and I've tried to work towards giving them some flexibility in peer support counseling, giving them different additional resources, and then working with the Department of Behavioral Health on a way forward to more community-based mental health care without throwing out the state hospital systems too quickly and putting just dominant, the resource challenge on the locality, on the CSB.
Transitioning people from prison to civilian life, once again, is a real challenge as well. We were talking earlier about how serious burglary is, and I think you have an initiative dealing with that.
We do, and it's a fight because burglary is a bad crime. But what we have found is that there are many people that 20, 25 years ago were charged with burglary, convicted of burglary in perpetuation of their addiction. Now they have gone through all the proper channels, they've done all the right paroles, served their time, gotten clean, and they are the people we're trying to get the ability to screen them. You don't have to hire them, but just screen them to see if they would be good peer support counselors. To sit across the table from someone struggling and say, I was in your seat, but it's not going to be easy because here are all the things you're going to have to do. But you can get out. You can be in my seat. You can put your life together as I have. And there's been some compelling testimony from senators on our side with family members who have done just that. But you talk about reentering life. The sheriff of Virginia Beach came and talked about the CSBs providing care in their jail, but also trying to link it to after they get out. Exactly. Well, he said they offered the CSB $1.5 million to do the work, and they declined. Well, he thought that that was them not doing their job. Mm-hmm. In essence, it really tells you how the level of resources necessary to properly help people. And I think in that case, they were saying, we're not ready, and we need more resources enabled in order to do it.
Talk about screening in relation to opioids and other drugs that are being abused.
Well, you know, right now in the House delegates, we're working as hard as we can to be able to fight that opioid crisis. One of the things that we've done recently is expand access to people who can administer naloxone, which is a drug that stops an overdose in its tracks. So we've been expanding that to EMTs and EMS providers, people who work in our CSBs, people who might not necessarily be a nurse or nurse practitioner, but who are on the front lines of the opioid crisis. And so we're trying to make sure that the people who are going to interact with someone who's overdosing will have access to these drugs, whether it's their immediate family members or their partners, people who know that they're dealing with a family member who's suffering from addiction.
You do have 49 Democratic members of the House of Delegates, and of course the Medicaid expansion is still with us. We don't have it yet. The Commonwealth of Virginia has lost literally billions of dollars. The federal government is still willing to take up 90% of that cost. Mm-hmm. What are the chances of success this session, do you think?
You know, I think that we have a bright future when it comes to expanding access to Medicaid here in Virginia. I think there are a lot of opportunities to be able to work across the aisle when it comes to making sure that we have the kinds of requirements that are put on people that many of our friends on the other side would be asking for. But there's so much money that's on the line here, whether it's to balance our budget when it comes to access to mental health and physical care in our jails, whether it has to do with being able to help the almost 7,000 people who are on the Virginia Peninsula who would be able to have access to care instantaneously. This is something that is not just a financial imperative, it's a moral one. And so we need to be able to work as hard as we can during the session, and I have high hopes that we're going to be able to find a bipartisan approach to this over the course of the rest of this session.
Senator, what's the population we're looking at in terms of expansion? I think everyone understands that a lot of women and children and the elderly currently are on Medicaid, but there's a very large group, 300 to 400,000 residents of the Commonwealth who aren't eligible for health care right now.
So women and children and some elderly, it's all. I mean, very small population of people eligible at this point. These numbers are somewhat dated, but the Senate Finance Committee a couple of years ago said that 71% of the people that were eligible for the expansion of health care have jobs. And interestingly, for our area, the numbers were 30-some-odd% are in the service industry. All right, so the tourism is the dominant industry on the Virginia Peninsula and Virginia, period. So here are people that are working in our restaurants and our hotels that are making you, when you come to Williamsburg and the Virginia Peninsula, enjoy your time, but they likely don't have insurance, and so they would be covered. There are 8% of people that would be eligible have 2 jobs. So really there's this misnomer that you're giving health care to people that are sitting around doing nothing, and that's just not the fact. So, you know, I think that you've seen recently, that being one of the proposals, some sort of work component. You know, I think we're willing to talk about many flexible options in order to get there. I don't care if you call it Medicaid expansion. We really don't care what you call it. But Mike mentioned the moral component. There's a budget busting component to this as well. And you always hear that the cost of Medicaid are growing. Well, they are. People are living longer. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. But everyone that goes on Medicaid in the last 4 years that we've been talking about this go on at a 50-50 split. Whereas if we expanded, they'd go on a 90% federal to 10% state split.
I think people don't understand when we talk about the elderly who are on Medicaid. Many of them are dual eligibles. They're also on Medicare, and unfortunately, a lot of them are suffering from Alzheimer's, which is a disease that is talk about a budget buster. Eventually, if we don't find something to slow it down or cure it, it's going to be a real budget buster for the nation. Many of these elderly wind up in institutions being taken care of. So That's a problem that the Commonwealth is going to have to deal with, and without help from the federal government, it's going to be even worse.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the component that you're hitting on right there, though, is housing. As we're going to be focusing over the course of the next 2, 3, and 4 decades, and this increasingly aged population, we have to find a way for people to be able to age at home, because we don't have the institutional support to be able to do that otherwise. And people, when you ask them, over 90% of people say that they don't want to leave their home when they've started to suffer from an ongoing disease, or whether it's something like Alzheimer's or dementia. They want the opportunity to be where they're with their family, with their loved ones. And so bringing people to institutions is too expensive, it's inhumane, and it's not what somebody wants anyway. And so finding these new opportunities to provide for housing and transportation so that people can still get back and forth to be able to get their groceries or get to church and still be able to live a long and fulfilling life are going to be some of the greatest budgetary issues that we're going to be facing over the course of the next few decades.
Turning to another subject that you're pursuing this session, dealing with handheld personal devices while driving.
Yes.
That's still a big problem.
It is. This little thing right here that I'm holding in my hand right now creates more issues on the road than just about anything else. 2016, we actually saw an increase in traffic fatalities in Virginia for the first time in 40 years. I can't imagine that's for any other reason other than the fact that everybody's on their cell phone when they're driving down I-64. We have to do something. I think that we're eventually getting towards the area where we're going to be a hands-free state. We're not quite there yet, but I have a number of bills this year to make sure that distracted driving penalties increase, and that particularly if you're in an accident where you've been on your cell phone and somebody gets killed, you're going to suffer the consequences as a result.
How important are accelerated tax refunds for small businesses?
Well, so that is, it's really more the citizen than the small business. It certainly helps small business if you're running it. But I was very surprised to have the commissioners of the revenue come to me and say, hey, we used to have this program, and it was really great service for our constituents. Remember, they're elected officials. And one commissioner told me that they have upwards of 50% of their staff working on tax returns in advance of the filing period. And I didn't know. Wow. And so it turns out that low-income, elderly folks will come into the office asking for help. And there used to be a program that you could just file the accelerated return right there and they'd get the check within 3 days. I've asked for that to be reinstituted. There are parameters that are based that make it very low risk, because you can't have more than a $300 differential since the last year. You can't get more than $3,000 back. So it's really a smaller subset. And the numbers had been falling because of electronic filing. But last year we had 795,000 people file that were not electronic, 18%. And the commissioners feel like that's a service they did once provide and they want to get back at it. And so that's passed the Senate, and we'll take that over to the House and see if they agree.
Speaking of taxes, what do you see as the impact of the tax cuts emanating from Washington, D.C.?
I'm extremely concerned on the impact on our nonprofits. I mean, increasing the write-off to $24,000. How many people, what percentage of people give $24,000 or above to charity? And so we hope and believe that these nonprofits, everyone understands the important role they play in our communities, and that people will continue to give to William and Mary, to your school, to Child Development Resources, to Williamsburg Community Foundation. But all of a sudden, if the tax write-off is not there, I'm extremely concerned about their next couple of years. So that's something we're going to have to keep a close eye on. I think it'll help a number of people, but I'm worried about our nonprofits.
It appears right now that there's a windfall as a result of prepayment of taxes by a number of individuals in the Commonwealth. I don't think we quite understand what it will ultimately mean, but it's also going to have an impact on adopting a budget this year.
That's true. Here in Virginia, we always have a balanced budget. We live within our means, and we don't do anything other than project our revenue and spend accordingly. We're not going to be running a deficit. And so I believe as a result of this past tax cut from the Trump administration, we see a lot of people who prepaid their taxes to be able to get in before the filing deadline of January 1st. And so I suspect as we get closer to the end of the year, we're going to see some tax revenues that we would normally be seeing in the state start to taper off a little bit. And that might mean that we might need to come back into special session, or whether we need to be more conservative in our budgeting this year as a result.
What about the overall impact of the inability of Congress to adopt a budget? We've been functioning on fumes in terms of continuing resolutions. We had a weekend shutdown. There's one looming again February 8th. All that uncertainty creates a lot of problems for your constituents. It creates problems nationwide. What's the impact?
Well, you know, Virginia is the #1 state in terms of federal employees, both military and civilian. Fully 14% of our economy comes from the federal government in one way or another. That's $59 billion worth of military spending that we see on an ongoing basis. And we've had a lot of that spending cut as a result of federal inaction over the course of the last few years. And I'm very concerned, particularly on the Virginia Peninsula, about the effect that that's going to have on our shipyards, on our military, and on our population generally. Between tourism and the military, those are the two pillars of our economy, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now.
Same concerns, I assume.
Absolutely. I mean, we just came from the military caucus. That is a bipartisan effort that's been working since before we were here on ways to attract and retain these qualified military folks that have come here, maybe getting out, or make sure that our institutions and installations are growing, and that are working hand in glove with the community to try to help them. And we always talk about what's going on inside the gate and trying to make sure that we are matching that with other businesses, right, jobs, and opportunities outside the gate. But when you're constantly working, they mentioned your February 8th deadline and said there'll have to be another continuing resolution. There'd just be no way they could get things done by that period of time. So when you're just, as much as I hate the phrase kicking the can down the road,
right.
That's essentially what they're doing when we just need the stability of making a call and determining, because you've seen some of the numbers on the military come that seem gargantuan, but there's a big gap between what it is now and what you hear. The gentleman that's been helping us with our strategic plan in Virginia for the last 4+ years said that these numbers are pure fantasy until they're passed and something's done about it.
So what are some of those military installations in your district that will be affected?
Joint Fort Eustis, Langley, right on the peninsula, the enormous, of course, the work done with NASA. Camp Peary's a little different, right outside of Williamsburg, but I have found it interesting since I've been doing this, the number of people that don't know the amazing work going on at Joint Eustis Langley. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Army's academy is there, TRADOC, they train. That's their educational facility for the world. It is actually a third port. That we have a port right there on the river. Langley, of course, you know from the fighter jets that you see overhead. But I mean, this is an enormous pillar of our community. And then, of course, the shipyard and right across Norfolk Naval Station. But they've also been there a while, so the modernization needs for the modern fleets and the modern forces, the ability to keep up with, but there's a lot of great cyber work being done there, a lot of unmanned systems work being done there, and also over at Wallops. So in southeastern Virginia, as well as northern Virginia, of course, but we have a huge portion of our military installations, but we've got to keep up with it. Dredging the channel, making sure we deal with sea level rise. So there are a lot of modern issues that we have to constantly keep up with that are costly, but critically important to the state and to our region.
The Triple V program, Virginia Values Veterans, transitioning retirees from the military into private work. How is that working from your perspective?
It's been a fantastic success. You know, in the last governor's administration, he was able to hire 30,000 new veterans. And you know, Governor Northam has made it his goal that he's going to hire 50,000 new veterans by the end of his 4-year administration. The V3 program has been a huge success, and I'm glad that Governor Northam is continuing it. I think that here on the Virginia Peninsula, we just opened up a new facility in Williamsburg to be able to help our veterans transition. And there's a lot more work that we can be doing on the education piece. You know, when you start to bring more organizations like the William & Mary Whole of Government program that we already have, expanding that, there are going to be people who are coming to the peninsula for the education piece, and when they retire, they're going to transition into private society and private life right where they were last working.
A lot of investments in the Port of Virginia over the last few years, more investments yet to be made to accommodate those post-Panamax ships.
Yes.
I think we still hold a significant competitive advantage on the East Coast, but how do we maintain that?
Well, we need to make sure that we continue to have the deepest, bluest water on the East Coast. And making sure that we dredge to 55 feet is a priority for both Republicans and Democrats across the aisle, and I think on both sides of the Senate and the House. You know, just yesterday, we were looking at some of the budgetary amendments. The first $21 million of the dredging plan is in the current budget, and I suspect that you're going to find that for planning purposes coming up. We need to make sure that when someone makes a port of call on the East Coast, the first place that they stop is right here on the peninsula and in Hampton Roads.
Understand, another one of our significant advantages is that the port is very wide,
Yes, sir.
so that ships can go in and out at the same time, as opposed to being parked outside, waiting hours, maybe days to get in to unload. There are a number of new cranes going in to accommodate that unloading.
Big growth, and we put, Mike's right, we put big money in to expand the port last year, to modernize the port. One of the Portsmouth sides of the port has 2 people that operate.
2.
Because it's all mechanized,
Right.
and those cranes move and pick things up and move it. But part of the dredging is widening it as well to make sure that they can still do so. But make no mistake, there are other issues. You know, we are big believers in renewable energy. And so the wind turbines off the coast, we're really excited about seeing that plan. But in our military meeting this morning, they talked about, make no mistake, we believe, I have severe environmental concerns about drilling off the coast of Virginia. But the military has serious concerns about drilling off the coast of Virginia due to the increased traffic, helicopters, ingress and egress for the military ships. And so, you know, there are other peripheral issues that have to be addressed that are multidimensional, and that's one.
About a minute left. I know you don't have any transportation issues in your district.
No, it's not like the expansion of 64 is not the biggest thing that's been happening for a long time. You know, we still have about 27 miles that we have to finish the expansion of 64 from right there at 199 all the way up to Bottoms Bridge. And so that's going to be a big priority this year, is making sure that we put the planning and the money down to be able to finish the expansion of I-64. Having 3 lanes in each direction is just too big a priority to get in and out of Hampton Roads.
And just in general, I know the Navy was real concerned about transportation issues because you've got a lot of tunnels and bridges.
Yes, sir. And we just talked about the port, getting things in. You got to be able to get it out. But you know, another component of that is not just widening. Don't forget the transit aspect of this. With our big employers, our community colleges, we've got to make sure we've got solid bus systems, and in some places, rail systems that can move people and take some of the stresses and pressures off of our major roads.
And of course, those community colleges play a significant role in workforce development.
Enormous. We one of ours in our area just became, Thomas Nelson just became another cybersecurity center of excellence. So they're really looking at the cutting edge and the new high school redesign program, trying to get people certifications and get them set up for jobs that are available now.
Great. Thank you for being here, both of you. Good to see you. And good luck the rest of the session.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.